Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching, whatever time you're listening. Welcome to Your Onion Podcast Show. Today we have a very special guest who's just popped in and is visiting Qatar. His name is Dr. Dolf De Roos. Did I get that right?
You did indeed, yes.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Qatar.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, with all my guests, I'd like you to just introduce yourself. Give us a brief introduction of, what you do. And then we'll go back in time and find out how that journey started.
Okay. Well, I believe very firmly that we can't rely on outside forces to look after us. We've got to become self-sufficient. And that's across many different fields, but one of them is the financial self-sufficiency. We owe it to ourselves to do that. We can't expect a handout. And so I really believe that to do well, you have to have passive income. So my mission really is to help people generate passive income so that they can lead the life they want to lead, be that helping other people or doing whatever. How I got to that point, of course, is a strange, long journey because we are born with a hard drive that is essentially empty and we have to learn as we go.
Okay.
But I have a rather unique background in that I was born in New Zealand, but I ended up going to school in 6 countries and I've lived in another 7. So in that sense, you could say I'm a citizen of the world.
How come? How was it? Obviously your parents moving around?
Yes. I'm often asked, were they diplomats? I say no. Well, were they in the military? I say
exactly.
No. What were they? And I say, I don't know. They must have been on the run or something. I think they just tried different things. We enjoyed traveling, trying different things. They were from Europe originally. They went to New Zealand. That's where I was born. Then we went back to Europe for a while, lived in Australia, a spell in Papua New Guinea.
So they just traveled and wherever they put their hat, they just picked up work.
Right.
Really?
Called it home, explored it, enjoyed it, and then maybe decided to move on.
Wow. And that must be an adventure in itself for
it is.
A child growing up.
It is. And a lot of people say that's so sad because it means you didn't grow up with people that you say knew at kindergarten and got to know that way. But I'll ask them, do you still know anyone that you went to kindergarten with? And they say, actually, no. So, well, there you go. What it did give me is friends all over the world.
Absolutely.
And sort of an understanding that even though there are many differences, we also share a lot of things in common, certain human basic needs and desires.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's what I love about my children being educated here, is that there's 88 different nationalities within the school.
Yeah, that's astounding.
And it's amazing, and it's just, my son has got ginger hair. And if he was back in the UK, he would have the Mickey taken out of him because he would be different.
Right.
But because he's in a school with 88 different nationalities, everyone is different.
Right. They're all ginger in their own way.
Absolutely.
And that's a great way of looking at it.
And I had the same kind of childhood as you, not international, but I moved every 2 years because my dad got promoted. So we would move from one town to the next. So I loved that. Because I always saw that as a fresh start. You make new friends.
Right. There's an old saying, but there's an element of truth to it. A little sad about the place you're leaving, a little glad about the place you're going to.
Absolutely.
And what I find now is I'll go back to a country like New Zealand or Australia where I lived for years, and I'll meet with friends there, and they're doing exactly the same thing. It's as though their lives have been put on hold until I've come back.
Still,
And so I almost feel as though I'm leading 3 or 4 lives simultaneously.
Yeah.
I know I'm not, but it sometimes feels like that.
So where did you go to university?
I did.
And what did you study?
Well, here's the thing. My parents believe that to do well in life, you have to study hard and get a degree.
Absolutely.
With the war and everything, they never really got a chance to do that. So they infused this idea into my sister and I. So without thinking, when I finished high school, off I went to university. Wasn't even sure what I wanted to study. But during my very first week at university, I looked around at me at the people with the degrees, the professors, the tutors, the lecturers, and it occurred to me that they weren't particularly wealthy. They tended to wear rather shabby clothes and they had very tiny cars and modest homes. And I thought there's something wrong with this formula that degrees equates to wealth. So I took it upon myself to make a study of the rich. I wanted to know, what do the rich have in common? Thinking, perhaps naively, if I could identify 30 or 40 things that they had in common, and if I could emulate some of those, I might have a shot at being rich.
I know, but your parents were thinking, okay, if you get a degree, that's always, like most parents, if you get a degree, it's always, you can choose your career after you get the degree, and it's always something that you can fall back on. because
Which is true.
Which is true. And with Qatar, they are very hot on the fact that, you know, if you're going to have a senior position, you have to have a degree.
Correct.
But when you went to university, you must have gone for a certain type of course. What was the course that you...
Well, I did.
What was the course that you drawn to?
I did engineering, electrical engineering, not the easiest course
Not the
around.
easiest, and that's always changing as...
It's evolving.
Yeah.
And look, I ended up spending 8 years at university. I ended up doing a PhD in electrical engineering. And the interesting thing is, everything I've been taught has been made redundant by new technology.
Yes.
So we learned the operating characteristics of valves. Most people these days don't know what a valve is other than a tap.
Yeah.
But valve radio style valves, and we know they were replaced by transistors and then integrated circuits and then VLSI, very large scale integrated circuits, on and on it goes. And they say, wasn't that a waste of time? And I say, no, because I didn't learn facts and figures that you can now look up on the internet. We learned creative ways of solving problems. And it's that ability to solve problems that sticks with you.
Yeah.
But here's the point of how I got into it. When I made the study of the rich, I could hardly find anything they had in common. It wasn't age, it wasn't gender, it wasn't religion, it wasn't whether you're an immigrant or not. I could only find two things that the rich had in common. And one of them is that almost without exception, the rich either made their money or held their wealth in real estate.
Okay.
And I thought, well, if that's all it is, I'm going to buy a property. So at the age of 17, I set out to buy a property, and I found one and made up a pitch as to why a bank should lend me the money for it, the first mortgage. And I gave this pitch to a bank manager, and he very politely and patiently waited for me to finish. And then he leaned forward and he said, "Are you done?" And I thought that was odd, but I said yes. He said, "This is a hoax, isn't it?" He thought it was a university prank. And I was devastated because I was flat serious, and yet he didn't believe it. But instead of giving up, I went to bank after bank after bank until eventually one said, "Okay, I'll fund it."
But were you studying at the time, or had you graduated?
No, I was doing electrical engineering first year.
So did you have any income, or did you have any savings?
No, no income.
So why would a bank lend you the money?
Well, I went to the 4 trading banks that we had in those days, and I asked for the maximum student loan.
Okay.
And fortunately, they didn't ask me if I'd been to any of the other banks, because I would have felt inclined to say, well, actually, yes, I have. So I managed to get the maximum loan from 4 banks, which amounted to $4,000. And that was my deposit or down payment, and then I got the mortgage for the rest. And here's the interesting thing. At the end of my first month, when I collected rent from my 4 tenants, it was an old wooden villa divided up into units, the rental was more money than that month's allocation of mortgage payment or property taxes added and a maintenance allowance. So I had made money and I hadn't worked for it. So I thought, I've got to do this again.
So that was your... So where was the aha moment that you're studying electrical engineering? I just want to get into the head of you. Is you know, you're studying electrical engineering, but then your mind's like, well, is this going to be my future career? Is this something that I really want to do, or is there something else? And were you then focused? Well, you know, what do I want out of life? Is it money? Is it happiness or whatever? So was it the money thing that kind of then, and that's why you studied the rich and the rich?
Right. No, not really. That first month when I had more money from rental income than the property cost me, that was a mini aha moment from, wow, this formula works.
Yeah.
But I did not yet think that I didn't need the degree or that I didn't need to do anything else.
So you still...
But I did buy another property and then another one, and I still studied. And at the end of 4 years, I got an honors degree in electrical engineering. And the university came to me and said, "You're doing so well. It's only 1 more year for a master's. Why don't you do it?"
Yeah.
And I said, because... And I didn't have an answer. So I did it. And halfway through that, they came to me and said, "You're doing so well. Why don't you switch your registration from master's to PhD?" And once again, I didn't have an answer or a reason, so I thought, well, I might as well. So I did that. In the meantime, I kept on buying more properties. Still no aha moment. I finished my doctorate, and you can imagine my parents, degrees equates to wealth. So they were very proud of their boy, right? And they were sitting by the telephone waiting for me to call them to announce that I'd accepted a job. And I confess I went to 2 job interviews. And at the end of the second interview, I was offered a job at $32,000 a year, which back then was a very handsome salary. But unfortunately, from my perspective, employer. The week before, I just completed a real estate deal that netted me $35,000. And I think that was the aha moment.
Okay.
Where in 1 week I could make more money with a real estate deal than I could by working for an entire year for a company. 40 hours a week, turning up every morning at 8 or 9 o'clock saying, "Hi, boss, here I am. What would you like me to do for you today?" So I didn't take that job, and to this day I've never had one.
Okay.
Much to my parents' consternation. In fact,
really? You know, have you not sat down with them and said, "Look, Mum and Dad, this is my property portfolio. This is how much money I'm making"?
Now they get it.
Right, but they didn't.
But I was 35 years old and visiting them in Europe, and they picked me up from the airport, and we were driving home. And my mother said to me, "You know, Dolf, it's not too late." And I looked at my watch as if to think, not too late for what, a dinner with an aunt or something? I said, "What for?" She said, "To get a job." And I said, "Why would I want a job?" And she said, "Because you don't have a pension plan." And I said, "But my real estate is my pension, you know." And 2 years later, I visited them, and they said, "You know, we've been thinking, maybe you did the right thing." And I was very happy with that concession from them, but I would have preferred to hear, instead of "maybe you did the right thing," how about just "you did the right thing"? You know? But now they get it. Okay. And so it took me a while to realize this, because I have many friends who still have jobs. And I wouldn't say they live, you know, hand to paycheck necessarily, but they're not extraordinarily well off. And they'll often complain they've got this job and they can't meet their bills, and what should they do? And I say, "Well, I've got a solution for you." And they say, "Oh, what's that?" I say, "Well, quit your job." And they say, "Quit my job? But I need the job to pay the bills." And truly, I think it's that thinking that keeps them trapped in that position. Because obviously you can't quit your job and have no income. But if you don't have a job that's your excuse for all your time is occupied, apart from your 40 hours, you have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to shower, etc., etc. It forces people to think, what can I do? What can I create in this world that so many people want that I'll be paid handsomely for it?
Yeah. So I'm curious, you're building up a property portfolio. When did you decide, okay, I want to share what I've learnt with other people?
You know, the irony is I never consciously decided that I wanted to share. I was buying up a number of properties, and these real estate agents came to me and said, "Are you wealthy or something? How come you can keep buying these properties?" And I said, "No, the truth is I do it all with no money." They say, "Well, that's impossible." And I thought, that's the interesting thing. These people deal with properties every day, and yet their belief is that it's impossible to buy anything unless you're rich. And I was living proof, because I came from a very modest family. My parents in Australia, when we lived there, they ran a convenience store. They didn't own it, they operated it. And here I am buying properties without any of my own cash. And so I realized at that stage it was largely one's belief system that determines one's ability to do something. So they came to me and said, "Listen, how do you do that? Could you teach us what you do, because it might help us find you more properties?" So they literally asked me to teach them. And I'll never forget, it was a Thursday night. I went to their premises on a street called Nelson Street. And I gave a talk just off the cuff. I never wrote anything down. And at the end of it, they said, "That was really great. Would you consider doing it again next week?" And I thought, wow, they liked it. So I said, okay. So I did a similar thing the following week. And at the end of it, they came to me and said, "That was really great. Would you consider doing it again next week?" And I thought to myself, I'm seeing a pattern here. Yeah. If I don't watch out, they'll get me to do this every week. I said, "No, I tell you what I'll do. I'll write some thoughts down." And so I started writing and writing and writing, and it ended up being my first book. And when I completed this book, I went to the biggest publisher at the time, Whitcoulls was the name, and I said, "Listen, I've got this book on property. Would you publish it?" And they looked at it and they said, "You know what? It's a niche market. No one will want it." And the truth is that they were the publishers. I was a nobody, so I believed them. And it's the sort of thing where our reality is largely determined by what we believe. Yep. So I believed them, but I thought, well, I've gone to this effort. I'll print the minimum quantity I can print, and I'll see if I can sell them myself. So I went to the printer. "What's the minimum number?" They said 500. I thought, 500? That's... Now, of course, you can do it on the internet and print a single copy. Yeah. So I had them printed. When they were delivered, I didn't realize how many boxes it would be, and I put my head in my hands and thought, how am I ever going to get rid of these? But I started selling them, and I had a post office box in the back where people could fill out an order form. And the orders trickled through, and I got rid of that 500 copies, and I ordered another lot, and then 1,000 copies, and
so
then 2,000.
how did you get the word out there?
Just word of mouth.
Really?
There was no email at the time. There was no Facebook, no Instagram.
What time are we looking at? What?
Oh, this is in the 1990s.
Okay.
Mid-1990s.
So it was just word of mouth that people...
Word of mouth. And then after 2 years, the publisher came to me and they said, we've heard that you've exceeded the bestseller requirements without it being in a single bookstore. And I hadn't heard that. I said, are you sure? That sounds, unlikely. And they said, no. Are we still able to print it, or are you mad with us? I said, I'm not mad, if you want to, sure. So that's when they picked it up. And the rest, as they kind of say, is history. I've done 15 books now. I've been published by some of the mainstream publishers, like Time Warner have done 6 of my books, Time Life, John Wiley and Sons. And I've ended up on the New York Times bestseller list for 7 months. So it's, we've done something right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what have you learned on this journey? What, from where you've come to where you are now? What's the biggest thing that you've learned?
One of the biggest things is you have to do what you're passionate about, because if you do something because it's your job, you need to do it to earn money to pay your food bill and things like that, that is not a healthy situation. And there's a saying that I love, and that is, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
No, exactly.
The second thing is that we do need passive income. And I think it's Warren Buffett who's credited with saying that if you don't find a way of earning passive income while you're asleep essentially, then you'll be condemned to working for the rest of your life. And especially if it's work that you don't enjoy, then that's not a good... So find what you love doing and then just follow your dream.
I know, but sometimes, and I've seen this in the past where I've worked with people that, have families and they're the main bread earner, and they're working all hours just to get the money to feed the family, education, etc., etc., and they feel trapped and there's no way out. How, when you say, follow your dreams, sometimes that's not as easy as it sounds.
It's not easy, and the solution that I might suggest even right now may not work for everyone, so I fully acknowledge that. But at the same time, I would say this. There are some things that anyone can do to increase their chances. So if you really analyze what people spend their time on, a lot of people spend a lot of time watching TV.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I say when I do an event, for instance, is if you want to improve your life, take your TV and toss it out the window. If you want to save some money, I'm all for that. Open the window first, but either way, get rid of the TV, because we don't realize how much time we waste watching. I'll just watch a few minutes. We sit down, we flick through the channels. Where I am, I have 600 channels. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
you cannot get through 600 channels and not find something that you say to yourself, well, I can justify watching that. That's quite interesting. The mating habits of moths in Ethiopia, and yet it amounts to nothing. Yeah. So get rid of it and then read some books. Get inspired. I particularly like real estate because it doesn't require a certain gender or age or even financial background. And if you just look at one property a day, or one a week if need be, eventually you'll find one where you're scratching your head saying, why would they let this go this cheaply? And
are you still excited about property?
I love it. If I go somewhere, even if I'm on holiday somewhere, I'll walk past a real estate agency or whatever it's called, an estate agency. I can't help but look in the window to see what are the prices like and wonder what the trends have been and what's going to happen. And more particularly, what can we do to this property to all of a sudden massively increase its value? And sometimes it's the silliest little things.
And have you seen a change in the way property is, the property market? Has that changed over time? Are there more people that are, getting the fact that property is a good investment?
No, I'm stunned at how stable it stayed. Like the proportion of people who rent as opposed to own is pretty stable. It goes up and down slowly over time, depending on the state of the economy. But a lot of people have zero interest in owning property. They, especially amongst the millennials, they are also going away from the concept of car ownership. Many millennials don't get a driver's license because they figure they never want to drive.
No, I've got a 20-year-old son who doesn't want a driving license.
And he doesn't have one to this day?
No, absolutely.
So he never drives himself.
No,
always a
no.
Uber or Lyft or taxi or something.
And I find that alien. That was the first thing that I wanted.
Oh, we covered it.
I wanted freedom.
The freedom, the thought that you might be able to date someone and drive them there.
Absolutely.
So for us it was just, it was a must.
But now,
So, well, you'll understand then that in that context, a lot of them don't want to own real estate. But from a property investor's perspective, that's not all bad, because it means there's a larger pool of people who willingly want to rent.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, no one likes paying rent. You'd rather pay nothing, right? But given that they know they want to rent, they would rather pay me rent than many other landlords because I look after them better. And that's one of the secrets to success. If you're a decent landlord and you actually look after the property and give them good value, then they'll appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. You see some horror stories, on TV, where you see landlords who don't take care of their tenants.
Well, I agree, and it goes beyond that. I'll give you one crazy example. I had one tenant. He'd been a tenant for something like 3.5 years, always paid the rent on time. Lovely man with a wife and 2 children. They rented a 3-bedroom house, and he came to me and said, Dolf, I'm sorry, but we're not going to renew the rental agreement because I'm leaving. And I could have said, that's very nice, and you've been a great tenant, and if you want a reference letter, I'm very happy to furnish one. But I went one step further, and I said, if you don't think it's too invasive, do you mind me asking why you're leaving? And he said, no, not at all. My wife is pregnant again. We're having another baby, and instead of a 3-bedroom house, we need a 4-bedroom house. So I said to him, tell me, if I were to build you the 4th bedroom, would you consider staying? And he said, oh my gosh, of course, that would save us the cost of transferring, having to look for new schools, the moving cost, just getting things organized, the time off work, of course. But how would that work? And I said, well, we'd have to charge more rent for that.
Yeah.
He said, well, I've already budgeted $400 a month more by going to a 4-bedroom house. So I did my numbers and I said, listen, if you paid me $300 a month extra and I built you the extra bedroom, would you stay? And he said, absolutely. So now people might say, well, how can I afford to build a bedroom for $300 a month? So very quickly, let's do the numbers. $300 a month is $3,600 a year. If interest rates are 10%, right now they're not, they're about half that, but even at 10%, that means that I could borrow $36,000, pay 10% interest, it would cost me $3,600 a year, and my interest on that loan would be covered by the extra rental. So the question now becomes, can I build the extra bedroom for less than $36,000? And I could. The quote came in at about $31,000. They were close to the market. It was $32,000. My interest was less than 10%. So not only did I increase my rental income here, I increased my collateral, I increased my equity, I increased my network and net worth, and most importantly, I increased my tenant appreciation. Because you can imagine this tenant saying to his buddies, oh my gosh, if ever you're going to rent a house, make sure you're... I just told him I was leaving. And then I didn't even tell him why or that I wanted anything. And he asked, do you mind me asking why? And I said, yes, extra bedroom. And he said, I'll build it for you. And it's that old saying, it comes from Zig Ziglar. You can get whatever you want in this world, as long as you help enough other people get what they want.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It doesn't always work.
No.
But for the most part, there is a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. So, moving forward, what are you... So you're into real estate, you're into, giving advice. What else?
One of my big thrills is not just helping people get started. That's always fun. But then you're always beginning with those who are doubters. They sit in an audience with their arms folded and basically
I can imagine.
Prove it to me why I should even be listening to you.
Yeah.
So, there's that notion. But I like it when I have someone perhaps with a substantial portfolio, but they're struggling or they might be losing one of their buildings or they've got cash flow squeezes, and we can come up with ideas to increase the value of their property. Now, I always have said that there are 101 things you can do to increase a property's value, and being one to always put my money where my mouth is, I have a book. It's the longest title on Amazon, and it's literally called 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. And the emphasis is on not spending much money. So I'm going to give you a wacky example. Everyone will probably say, well, that's impossible, until I have to explain it. But we once turned $20 into $2 million overnight. And I concede that initially it sounds nuts, and anyone who stops listening at this point will probably convince themselves that it would have been nuts had they listened. But here's the situation. It was in Jakarta, Indonesia. Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia. They have more traffic congestion there than in any other city in the world. They're building a subway now, but right now you measure how long it takes to get somewhere, not in kilometers, but in hours. So the client's building, it was a commercial building, was in the center of town. The drive to the airport should have been about 45 minutes. But because of traffic, you don't know whether it was going to take you 3 hours or 5 hours. So if one of the directors in the company that leases an office there has a 2 p.m. flight, he couldn't have a board meeting at 9 a.m. because he may not make his connection.
Okay.
So back to the point. What did we spend the $20 on?
Yeah, curious.
A bucket of white paint and a brush.
Okay.
And we went onto the roof of this commercial building. It was a flat concrete roof. And we painted a big white circle. And in the middle, we painted the letter H. In other words, we turned it into a helipad. Now, full disclosure, we also needed Civil Aviation Authority approval. That involves a few dinners and promises of helicopter rides and things like that. But we managed to get that across the line. So now the tenants in our building could get to the airport in 15 minutes. So the rental value went from, at the time, about $140 a square meter to $160 a square meter. So the rental value that the tenants willingly paid, even if they didn't use the helicopter service, they could brag that they had access to it. So $20 a square meter, the building had 10,000 square meters, so the rental went up by $200,000. And when you cap that out at 10%, the value of that is a $2 million lift. And as true as I sit here, these examples are real. And I always say, and it's one of my favorite sayings about real estate, the most valuable piece of real estate is the 15 centimeters, give or take a centimeter or two, between your right ear and your left ear, because it's what you create in that space that ultimately determines your net worth.
That's amazing. No, that's great. That's a great story. But that seems to be the trend. I watch UK TV, but that seems to be the trend that I think there's a show on BBC at the moment where, they convince you to stay in your house because, people aren't valuing the space that they've got. And, you get an architect going in and saying, look, you can change the space. What do you need? And then, how much is it going to cost you to move to another property and use that money to do the changes within your property? And generally they stay because they don't want to move. Right. But that's amazing, even with a, apartment block, a tower block, you can make that simple change and you've just changed the whole, value of it. It's incredible. So is that what that's a new exciting part in your journey?
It's something I've started more recently.
Yeah. You're like the Gordon Ramsay from culinary to now you're the Gordon Ramsay of property.
In a sense. Of course, I'm waiting for the moment where they describe Gordon as being the Dolf De Roos of the kitchen. But anyway. We can wish for it.
You never know, exactly. Okay.
So yes, I get invited in and, we do these makeovers. And then they might say, well, what's it going to cost? And I come up with a number, £50,000 or $40,000 or something. And they say, well, that's outrageous for 2 days' work. And you can tell that mentally they're doing the calculation what it is per hour. And I say, okay, well, I've got another solution that you might prefer. And they somewhat hesitantly say, well, what would that be? And I say, well, how about I charge you nothing? And I just get 5% of the increased value.
Yeah.
And they say, well, that sounds much fairer. So take the case of this helipad, a $2 million lift, 5% is $100,000. That's more than the $50,000 we might have charged.
No, exactly. So, has there been anything that, because your journey sounds, an amazing journey and it sounds great. Has there been anything that's happened to you that, hasn't gone your way?
Oh, of course.
Lessons in life?
Yes, absolutely. A ton of them. And this notion that some people have all the luck and everything goes well. No, I think a lot of it too is what do you focus on? And, that's why I keep thinking of these notions that success doesn't mean never falling, but it means rising every time you fall. And I'd go further. Someone who hasn't fallen off and probably doesn't have much grit. And I think one of the reasons why I've had any measure of success is I've been willing to make mistakes and I've learned from them. And I've made plenty of mistakes. And we've had many things go wrong. Some of the things I would put down to just awkward timing. So it wasn't something we consciously did or had control over. I was involved in a massive development. It was a $2 billion development that went under around 2007 because of the GFC coming on board. And again, it's nothing that was essentially done wrong. But when, interest rates go up a bit and money gets a bit tight and you can't get that mezzanine finance, and then all of a sudden everything conspires to go against you. And as much as pundits will applaud you when they see you doing well, they are so quick to take you down when they smell that things are... So that whole thing collapsed with all the attendant problems that came from that. So no, there have been plenty of things that haven't gone right, but we live and learn. And they say when we get old, we don't look back on life and regret the things we did that we shouldn't have done. We tend to regret the things we didn't do that we could have done.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I try to live by is just, have a measured decision, of course, but try things, try different things. And if you can enjoy what you do and help others on the way, that's a pretty magical formula.
Yeah, very true. Well, thank you, Dolf. I'll end it on that note. That's a superb note to finish on.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
I appreciate you coming in and speaking to us, and I wish you all the best. And just finally, why are you here in Qatar? Can you tell us?
Yes. I have some associates here that invited me, and I'm having some reasonably high-level meetings to see if we can offer any of what we've been talking about to some of the institutions here.
So, because I know there's a few empty buildings, so is that why you're...
That is partially why I'm here, but the things we're discussing don't just involve real estate within Qatar, some investments that are made overseas.
Very good. All right. Well, I wish you all the best. And, if you're ever back in town, please come in and give us an update.
All right.
It'd be great
Thank you so much.
up.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Don.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to catching up with you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.